Badan Nasional Penempatan dan Perlindungan Tenaga Kerja. Selamat datang Pak Tatang, tepuk tangannya untuk Pak Tatang. Mas Andhika, Chrisnayudhanto, Director of Multilateral Cooperation, Badan Nasional Penanggulangan Terrorisme. Silakan. Kita masih menunggu Bang Usman Hamid, Direktur dari Amnesty International Indonesia, dan kita akan bicarakan soal human security, keamanan manusia. Kita bicaranya dari berbagai spektrum di sini. Karena narasumber yang hadir bersama kami saat ini data latar belakangnya tidak hanya untuk human rights issues, tapi juga soal terorisme di sini ada, dan bagaimana keamanan atau mengamankan tenaga kerja Indonesia atau di sini kalau bisa lebih fokus tenaga kerja Indonesia yang berada di luar negeri, dan juga soal refugees yang masih menjadi topik yang hangat sebenarnya untuk dibicarakan saat ini. Saya berikan kesempatan pertama kepada Bapak Michael Vatikiotis dari Center for Humanitarian Dialogue. Each panelist you will have 5 to 7 minutes maximum for presentation to speak, and then we'll start the discussion. Mr. Michael, the floor is yours.
Terima kasih, selamat sore. Saya Michael Vatikiotis dari Center for Humanitarian Dialogue. Terima kasih kepada Pak Dino dan timnya kasih saya peluang di depan anak-anak muda masing-masing bagi beberapa pikiran atau butir tentang masalah human security di Asia Tenggara. I'd like to speak specifically about the human security agenda from a Southeast Asian perspective. Southeast Asia is one of the most prosperous regions of the world today. The internet has penetrated rural as well as urban areas, and many countries have among the highest numbers of people with Facebook accounts. Asia Tenggara sebagai salah satu kawasan yang sangat makmur dibandingkan dengan kawasan lain, sangat teraman, dan penduduknya bergabung lewat saluran internet. Karena itu, orang Asia Tenggara dengan hasil kemajuan punya potensi cukup untuk pertolongan kalau ada masalah atau krisis manusiawan di sekitarnya. Southeast Asians have the means and the access to care about the lives of others across borders, and they increasingly know about the disasters and conflicts that plague their neighbors. Old patterns of parochialism and isolation are fast eroding. And yet, Southeast Asians actually do little to help each other. Pertolongan kurang. There is a singular lack of compassion or action. A minimal amount, I would say. When human tragedy strikes in Southeast Asia, the reflexive action of governments is to hesitate, make cautious statements of concern, and then mostly do nothing. Or a bare minimum to avoid being too intrusive. This is what happened when 700,000 Rohingya Muslims fled across the Myanmar border into neighboring Bangladesh. What I want to talk about today is why is this the case? Why is Southeast Asia so reluctant to help? Why are Southeast Asian countries so reluctant to help each other? The first reason is, I think, the principle of non-interference. Most of the 10 ASEAN countries are relatively young, and as a result, they regard sovereignty as paramount. Neighbors are often considered as historical enemies or competitors. Southeast Asia is a patchwork of diverse cultures and societies who have traditionally traded but seldom unified. The region is dissected by different ethnic groups and religions who coexist but never really combine. And this explains why the principle of non-interference is so sacrosanct. The idea of ASEAN as a community is still a pipe dream. As Pak Dino said earlier today, only 1% of Indonesians know that there's even an ASEAN economic community. So when calamity befalls in one country, there is a tendency of others to avert their gaze. The second reason, I believe, is an entrenched reluctance to examine the past, which means that when bad things happen, like the humanitarian crisis in Rakhine State, there's a reflexive actions to close one's eyes and avoid the issue of accountability. Southeast Asia has seen mass murder on a massive scale in recent history. After the heavy yoke of colonialism was lifted, governments in newly independent states used some of the same repressive methods to maintain control over people. Popular resistance to authoritarian rule generated ideological conflict and a violent backlash. So, here in Indonesia, more than 500,000 people were killed because they were suspected of being communists. And in Cambodia, close to 2 million people were killed by the Khmer Rouge in the 1970s. There has never been a reckoning for this appalling litany of mass murder, and this is important because it partly explains why there is a muted outcry over the fate of Muslim Rohingya. When the International Criminal Court indicated it could launch an investigation of what happened in Rakhine State, in this case Bangladesh, there was almost no reaction from the rest of the region. There was no ASEAN statement of concern or support, because the ICC has little or no jurisdiction in the rest of ASEAN. Impunity rules. These misplaced feelings of national pride, fear of losing face and dignity, and the shame of examining the past, these are all huge obstacles to addressing the transnational challenges to human security in our region. And yet, protracted internal conflicts remain unaddressed across huge swathes of Myanmar, southern Thailand, and the Philippines. The Rakhine conflict has generated more than 1 million refugees, and there are still parts of this region where labor is paid slave wages. Very briefly, what is to be done? Kita bisa membuat apa? Firstly, I think civil society needs to join hands across boundaries. You can't rely on government policymakers to overcome the boundaries to transnational compassion. Masyarakat sipil di seluruh Asia harus bergabung. It would be good to see a Southeast Asian version of Human Rights Watch, Médecins Sans Frontières, or even the ICRC emerge to bind our societies together to respond to crisis. Second, citizens need to shame their governments into action on humanitarian issues. The role of social media is important. Ordinary people now have the power to influence policy with a tweet or posting, and we should not shy away from calling on foreign policymakers to act. And thirdly and lastly, Southeast Asia has the wealth and resources to establish regional institutions to manage threats to human security. The ASEAN Secretariat here in Jakarta is home to the ASEAN Humanitarian Assistance Center, AHA. It's poorly staffed and relies on outside funding. Why can't ASEAN fund its own institutions? Standing in the way of greater resources for the center is, I believe, this awful non-interference principle. Thank you, I'll leave it there.
Untuk human security ada sekitar 68,5 juta orang
Di seluruh dunia yang terpaksa keluar dari rumahnya, dan di antara mereka ada 25,4 juta refugee dan lebih dari setengahnya di bawah 18 tahun. Ini data dari UNHCR tahun 2018. Julie, I would like you to explore more regarding this issue. What is the current status of the refugees worldwide?
Very much. Good afternoon, everyone. Selamat siang. I'm new here in Indonesia, working on it. And on behalf of our country representative for UNHCR, I'd like to thank you for inviting UNHCR to this important event. He sends his regrets. He's currently unable to come because he's assisting the government in the response to Central Sulawesi disaster and providing shelter and relief items. So I would like to start by giving a global snapshot of the forced displacement situation at the end of 2017. By the end of last year, 68.5 million people were forcibly displaced worldwide as a result of persecution, conflict, or generalized violence. Of those 68.5 million, there are about 25 million refugees that have crossed an international border, 3 million asylum seekers who have not yet been accorded the status of refugees, and 40 million people internally displaced displaced in their own countries. And almost 4 million of these forcibly displaced are stateless also, which we know is a major risk factor in displacement. So what is fueling the rise in displacement globally and in this region as well? There are a couple of factors, and I think I can build on some of the things mentioned in our previous speaker to mention now, and I hope we'll have a chance to talk more. But we've certainly seen an intensification of crises and conflicts driven by poverty, by exclusion, and also the growing impact of climate change. We also see governance failures that create space for extremism, which spurs displacement. And then we see a lack of solutions for those who are displaced, meaning that people become displaced and remain in limbo for years, for decades, or even for generations. This shows us where most of the world's refugees are from and where they are currently in asylum. So you can see that more than 2/3 of the world's refugees come from just 5 countries. And these are Syria, Afghanistan, South Sudan, Myanmar, and Somalia. And so you can see this is a mix of protracted or drawn out refugee situations, for example in Afghanistan and Somalia, and Syria, which now qualifies as a protracted situation, as well as more recent situations of forced displacement from Myanmar, for example. And South Sudan is an example of multiple displacements over decades. And where are refugees being hosted? Almost 90% of the world's refugees are hosted in developing nations or lower income countries, which places a pressure on already limited services and infrastructure and resources. Many of the 8 countries you see here have their own significant development challenges. This shows us what happened in 2017. So on the left you see where refugees were fleeing in 2017, and on the right where they fled to. So in 2017, more than 2.7 million people fled their homes to another country, becoming refugees. This is the largest increase in the number of refugees in a single year in the history of UNHCR as an organization. You can see that the vast majority of those displaced in 2017 originated from just 3 countries. Those are South Sudan, Syria, and Myanmar. And they found protection in the bordering countries or in their immediate regions, which increased the refugee populations that were already hosted in those countries, in Turkey, Bangladesh, Uganda, and Sudan. Now, to their credit, these countries continued to generously keep their borders open and receive additional refugees. Some refugees went further beyond the neighboring countries, and we are unfortunately seeing a trend further afield where countries, particularly higher income or richer countries, are pushing back and even closing their borders to asylum seekers. So, what are the solutions? UNHCR is, of course, mandated to seek solutions to refugee situation. One of those, of course, is safe return home, voluntary repatriation. And from this chart, we can see a global trend in voluntary repatriation since the 1990s, which is unfortunately a very steady decline in the numbers of refugees who are able to return home in safety and dignity. And this is an indicator of, one, the types of conflicts that we see pushing people to flee, which is meaning they're becoming more protracted, and also a trend in multiple displacements, where you see a few instances where we have large numbers of people returning, and then years later only to be displaced again. This slide shows us a trend in resettlement, which is another solution. It's a third country solution. The red line shows us the estimated number of refugees in the world who are in need of resettlement and who should be prioritized based on their vulnerabilities or protection needs. The green line is the number of refugees that UNHCR is actually able to submit for a given year. So a few things are very clear here. The first is a steady increase in the resettlement needs, of course, over time. Second, we see a slight increase in resettlement slots, the green line. But what happened in 2016 and 17, we we see a significant dip. So in this context, with increasing levels of forced displacement and fewer solutions, it's clear that we need a more comprehensive approach so that host countries and communities are not left dealing with this alone. For this, we need to foster multilateralism and international cooperation. UNHCR is overseeing the drafting of a global compact on refugees, which has 4 main objectives. The first is to ease the pressure on host countries. The second is to enhance refugees' self-reliance so that refugees can take care of themselves in their countries of asylum and not be a burden on their host countries that can contribute. The third is to expand those third country solutions that we saw, including resettlement and other options. And then finally, we want to, of course, support conditions for return in safety and dignity. This is ultimately the solution that's going to do the most to reduce the numbers of those who are displaced and also to prevent future displacement. So if we think of those 5 countries where more than 2/3 of the world's refugees come from, and we pick one of them that's already been mentioned here, Myanmar, it's just one example of an opportunity and a responsibility on the part of the international community, including Indonesia, to do something, to support those who are displaced, to address the reasons for displacement, and to foster conditions of return.
Thank you, Ibu Julia. Bicara soal human security, tentu tantangannya salah satunya adalah soal modern slavery. Ini adalah yang akan dibahas. Sebenarnya apa sih tantangannya, seperti apa modern slavery ini khususnya dihadapi oleh Indonesia, Pak Tatang, Razak? Silakan.
Baik, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Kita semua, ketika dari panitia meminta untuk menyampaikan ini, maka karena waktunya singkat, saya mencoba melihat modern slavery merupakan tantangan di era human security. Kalau bicara human security, ini adalah paradigma baru yang untuk memahami perkembangan global, di mana ini tumbuh berkembang sangat cepat pasca perang dingin. Saya tidak akan bicara teori itu, tapi saya ingin melihat perubahan pendekatan. Ada perubahan pendekatan yang sangat signifikan, yaitu perlindungan diberikan pada level individual, menempatkan perlindungan manusia pada kepentingan nasional, dan menunjukkan bahwa negara akan aman apabila masyarakat aman dari ancaman non-tradisional, yaitu ancaman non-tradisional itu adalah misalnya kelaparan, kemiskinan, penyakit, kerusakan hutan, dan pelanggaran HAM. Lalu juga sekarang ini memberikan kesempatan pada stakeholders untuk terlibat dalam menjamin keamanan. Jadi di Indonesia sangat terasa sekali bagaimana di masa lalu dengan di masa sekarang bagaimana keterlibatan dari setiap individu termasuk tokoh-tokoh dalam human security ini. Terus wujudnya human security tidak hanya ditentukan oleh negara, namun juga negara lain, ya, dan termasuk masyarakat global. Terasa sekali dampaknya human security ini. Apa yang terjadi di belahan dunia begitu cepat. Nah, lalu tantangan yang kita lihat termasuk oleh Indonesia dirasakan banyak negara ketika terjadi perubahan di fora internasional ini yang beradaptasi secara cepat dan cukup berhasil. Memang Korea Selatan atau misalnya Cina. Tapi banyak juga negara yang malah mundur bahkan bangkrut dalam perubahan-perubahan ini. Nah, oleh karena itu tantangan utama dari human security adalah kesiapan negara, terutama negara berkembang untuk menjamin human security dan terbebas dari ancaman non-tradisional seperti yang saya katakan tadi, dan memerlukan kesepahaman dan kerjasama dengan negara-negara lain di dunia ini, multilateral response dalam menjamin human security. Hal ini sulit ya dilakukan karena setiap negara memiliki kepentingan masing-masing. Contohnya, ketika tahun 2000 di sana ada Millennium Summit, pertemuan puncak terbesar di dunia, 168 kepala negara kumpul di New York dan mendeklarasikan Millennium Development Goals. Tahun 2015 tidak ada lagi orang yang tidak minum air bersih dan seterusnya. Tapi apa yang terjadi hingga saat ini masih banyak kemiskinan karena kepentingan negara. Ratusan miliar, satu negara bisa mengeluarkan ratusan miliar dolar hanya untuk menyerang negara lain dan sebagainya. Lalu ketidakseimbangan power relation antara negara maju dan negara berkembang. Baik, nah lalu Di sini kita masuk kepada isunya modern slavery tantangan di era human security ini. Bentuk dari modern slavery tentunya kerja paksa, jeratan hutang, perdagangan manusia, penyeludupan manusia, perbudakan berdasarkan turunan, dan perbudakan anak dengan paksa. Nah, apa yang terjadi sekarang ini, termasuk Indonesia saat ini juga menghadapi situasi yang tidak mudah. Kebetulan kami di kantor BNP 2 DKI, walaupun kita melihat bahwa khususnya untuk tenaga kerja pembantu rumah tangga, bekerja di kelapa sawit dan bekerja di sektor-sektor itu, kita sekarang memiliki data sekitar 3 juta tenaga kerja Indonesia di luar negeri. Tapi sesungguhnya lebih dari itu, kita mungkin 7 juta, karena banyak yang ilegal. Mereka bekerja walaupun di sektor formal, tapi mereka bekerja di bawah upah minimum. Pembantu rumah tangga mereka tidak bisa keluar, bahkan puluhan tahun, bertahun-tahun tidak bergaji, mendapatkan tindakan kekerasan dan sebagainya. Nah, oleh karena itu kita melihat bahwa di sini peluang, ya, kalau kita bisa melihat peluang human security bagi Indonesia, ya, tentunya bonus demografi sering kita banggakan. Jumlah penduduk Indonesia saat ini 291 juta, ya, tingginya usia produktif. Tapi tantangannya apa? Kita lihat di sini, bagaimana masih rendahnya tingkat pendidikan dari angkatan kerja yang tidak sekolah 3% dan seterusnya, dan di sini yang tidak tamat SD, bahkan jumlah SMP yang lulus SMP, SMA jadi sangat tinggi. Nah, ini menjadi tantangan buat kita. Lalu kehidupan sosial ekonomi yang masih rendah, jumlah penduduk miskin 25 juta, tidak kurang produktif, ya. Tradisi budaya suku tertentu, kondisi geografis yang banyak celah untuk memudahkan tindakan slavery ini. Lalu apa yang dilakukan oleh pemerintah Indonesia? Jadi sejak awal kita mencoba, tentunya tidak mudah karena ini juga terjadi di seluruh dunia. Bahkan tadi Pak Dino menyampaikan lebih dari 45 juta orang menjadi korban modern slavery. Jadi ada undang-undang yang mengatur serikat upah, banyak sekali undang-undang yang bagaimana kita memprotek undang-undang trafficking persons, juga langkah moratorium pengiriman pembantu rumah tangga ke seluruh negara Timur Tengah. Undang-undang nomor 18 tahun 2017 ini perubahan fundamental tata kelola, dan saat ini BNP DKI mungkin akan akan muncul lembaga baru bagaimana untuk memberikan perlindungan tenaga kerja Indonesia ini, lalu juga memberikan vokasi dan upgrading skill supaya mereka memiliki kemampuan, pemberdayaan masyarakat dengan literasi dan edukasi keuangan bagi pekerja migran Indonesia, dan pemberian kredit usaha rakyat. Nah, untuk itu ini adalah sisi lain dari keberhasilan Indonesia di berbagai sektor, tapi Anda sebagai generasi muda harus tahu bahwa masih ada sisi-sisi yang perlu kita perhatikan. Nah, oleh karena itu tidak ada cara lain di tengah kompetisi global ini, maka kita harus terus berusaha, dan pemerintah bersama stakeholders lainnya akan terus berusaha di tengah dinamika yang ada untuk melakukan langkah-langkah seperti yang kami katakan tadi. Nah, inilah mungkin karena waktunya juga sudah habis, maka nanti kita akan kembangkan dalam satu dialog dan tanya jawab. Terima kasih.
Terima kasih Tatang untuk Mas Andhika Chrisnayudhanto. Mas Andhika akan berbicara dari sisi mungkin bukan tidak bisa dikatakan dampak ya Mas, tapi kalau permasalahan di hilirnya ada aksi terorisme yang terjadi, ternyambung juga dengan human security. Apakah nyambung begitu dengan tadi isu-isu soal refugee dan sebagainya? Kondisi di Indonesia saat ini bagaimana dan apa yang sudah dilakukan BNPT? Silakan.
Terima kasih. Allow me to speak partly in English because two of the previous speakers have spoken in English. I would like to do it in 2 languages, but I think it will take too much time. So, firstly, I'm not going to present what has been prepared because I know it's only 7 minutes, so we do not want to run out of time. But I've been trying to think again, what do we want to do with this particular topic? Because we're looking into the human security agenda, but at the same time we are refocusing on conflicts. It looks towards refugees. It also looks towards modern slavery, which has been elaborated by Tatang. And now we're looking into radicalism and also terrorism. Now these are the things that is coming up that we are facing today, and something is words that we hear on a general basis. But also we see there's a problem to this, that it connects with what is the focus of this particular seminar today, which is on human security. And the way to address it is changing. For us in the National Counterterrorism Agency, the approach was that we had advocated from the start when it transpired with the Bali bombing in 2002. It was mostly focused on law enforcement and also the use of security measures in trying to solve the problems of countering terrorism and also radicalism. Nowadays, as we have adopted a new law, number 5 of 2018, the approach was much focused towards also balancing between the hard and soft approach. So in this era of human security agenda, the focus was coming towards looking into a more of a softer approach that looks towards human rights. It looks towards how is it good governance, how is your country preventing conflicts, and I think this comes in line with what we are discussing today. And then it looks into how we are able to empower our youth, how we are able to empower women, how we are able to engage with the community. We look into how to better provide education, skills facilitation, and all these things to address the issues of violent extremism, radicalism, and terrorism itself. So the new law in Indonesia provided that avenue. It had a separate chapter on prevention, but it also focused on law enforcement method, which is still important. But this provided a brief outlook what is available out there when we discuss all these kind of issues: conflicts, refugees, modern slavery, also radicalism and terrorism, where we focus on a more softer approach. And I think this is what we are advocating at this moment. Also, in line with that, Indonesia, in particular the National Counterterrorism Agency, is coming up with a national action plan. And this national action plan is called the National Action Plan for Countering Violent Extremism. The main purpose of this particular national action plan is to complement existing legislation that is out there already on counterterrorism, but it will focus more on the soft approach. It will focus more on what we can do to prevent from happening. It will provide with us certain sort of interventions that are focused on social matters. It focuses on development. It focuses on how we can better empower our youth and becoming more resilient toward radicalism and terrorism. We're also focusing on how we can garner and empower women in particular, because women right now, if you look at the landscape, is not only victim of terrorism in Indonesia, but right now they're also perpetrator. The latest bombing in Surabaya showed us that one family can perpetrate that. So it becomes ever more important whether it would be law enforcement or would you opt for something more softer. And I believe something that is looking into things that is focused on development rather than looking into a security-focused approach would be much better in our effort when we look at how we can secure a human security agenda in this time and manner. I thank you very much.
Thank you. Terima kasih, Mas Andhika. Last but not least, Bang Usman. Bang Usman, I guess the main question for this session is sebenarnya tantangan yang paling mendesak. If we talk about human security globally, what is the most pressing challenge? And also, if we talk about Indonesia, seperti apa tantangannya? And do you think for global issues, can we rely to the UN on this?
That's a very tough question. So, for me, as a human rights activist, I think the key challenge is the decline of human rights across the globe. The decline of freedom, the decline of democratic equality across the globe. There has been a lot of studies of the political scientists in so many parts of the world have agreed there has been a significant decline over the last 10 years across the globe. And secondly, if we look into the data from, let's say, Freedom House or The Economist, it all shows a decline in governance and political turbulence across the globe. So one of the important elements when we talk about human security is governance and political turbulence across the globe. We've seen, a lot of countries, including Indonesia, unfortunately, has been in decline. Used to be fully free, and now it's partly free. The Economist set another data. So many countries, including established democracies, are now in decline when it comes to dealing with free speech. There's an ongoing rise of politics of demonization, politics of hate, of suspicion. The world is becoming more and more polarized. So this is a real challenge that we are facing today. And Indonesia is not an exception. In the recent Jakarta election, for example, Pak Ahok was being imprisoned because of this politics of hate, politics of demonization, divisive rhetoric. So if you look into the last 2-3 years ago, people or the political elites have just used divisive politics as a rhetoric. But last year, we've seen a real impact with the imprisonment of someone like Ahok. And this year, someone like Ibu Miliana in North Tanjung Balai. So, of course, when we look at some other countries, Indonesia should be grateful. Compared to many other new democracies, I think Indonesia remains resilient in terms of democratic quality. Compared to Southeast Asia, Indonesia is an exception. Let me give you an example of Myanmar. The divisive rhetorics or the politics of criminalization against Muslim ethnic minority of Rohingya has resulted in a very serious crimes. Ethnic cleansing, according to the UN. Crimes against humanity. It's not only about the migration of hundreds of thousands of people from Myanmar to Bangladesh, which create another human security issue, but also a very, very deep-rooted conflicts within Myanmar. So what we have to do, I think the case of Indonesian diplomacy has been, I would say, very positive in pushing for humanitarian restoration or recovery in Myanmar and also in Bangladesh. And I'd like to put respect for Indonesia for playing a role in addressing the Myanmar crisis. But I think Indonesia should go further on the human rights diplomacy by pushing for accountability for what happened in Myanmar. So only with human rights approach that we can address the prolonged discrimination of the case like Rohingya can be addressed. It's not only about the killings of Rohingya, it's about the discrimination resulted from the exclusion of Muslim minority ethnic. And apart from the Muslim discrimination, I think we've seen Hindus being attacked by the armed militants. So conflicts across the globe, especially in the Middle East, it's a proxy of the world-class conflicts. The tension between Russia, US, North Korea, it all comes together, resulted in a migration of people, not only to Europe with refugee influx, but also to Jakarta. If you go to Jakarta Barat, West Jakarta, you will see a lot of people coming from Afghanistan, from Yemen, living in a pedestrian route without proper access to health, proper access to education. So this is the challenge. And I think human rights is the most important element when we really want to improve human security across the globe and in Indonesia. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Usman. I would like to open the discussion. We have a very limited time, so please raise your hands.
My name is Chrisnayudhanto, and I'm representing University. I have a question actually regarding human rights, and this This is a very important topic. The first one, how could we address
To the question you're addressing to? Ke siapa?
to all panels,
Choose one. We only have very limited time.
to the representative of the UNHCR?
Okay?
How do we address the issue of human rights towards government and when hosting refugees? It also creates security issues within the state. And the second question would be, how could we use the social media as a tool to promote and also to persuade people to eradicate violation of human rights when others in the same platform? There's also provide biased argument about human rights violation. Thank you.
Thank you. Ibu Julia, you may answer that.
For the approach that we're trying to advocate overall here, which is inclusion, multilateralism, and solidarity. So I think the things that you've mentioned are sort of falling under those themes as well. So I think, as some of our other panelists have said, we're dealing with a politics of hate, a politics of suspicion and fear, and how to counterbalance that. And I think multilateralism and cooperation is the way to do it. It's a natural kind of counterweight, and inclusion. So I can give an example from another country where I've worked recently. I'm recently here, but I was 4 years in Uganda. And this is a country that's poor, has only about 35 million people, and there are 1 million refugees. And they have managed to keep the doors open and to even allow refugees to contribute to the economy there by allowing them to work, allowing them to farm, to go to school alongside Ugandans. And so this sort of approach of inclusion, I think, is the way forward in addressing a lot of these security issues. Inclusion of marginalized groups, including refugees. Your question on social media, I think that can be an excellent tool towards inclusion and showing solidarity to refugees. So I do think there's absolutely a place for Indonesians to begin that and to use that as a tool for inclusion here in Indonesia, where we are hosting only 14,000 refugees compared to a country like Utama.
Saya ingin menanyakan terkait riset dari PPAN tentang 6 dari 10 buruh itu radikal. Kemarin kami melakukan training. Kemarin kami melakukan training kepada Ijen Kemendikbud, auditor dari Kemendikbud untuk melakukan kayak semacam basic study training untuk auditor, untuk pengawas sekolah. Nah, dari BNP itu sendiri, gimana menyikapi hasil riset ini gitu? Terkait
yang 6 dari 10 guru
itu
dari BNPT
itu
bagaimana
kan
menyikapinya?
dari Ijen Kemendikbud masih ada sedikit resisten sedikit.
Terima kasih. Silakan Mas Andhika.
Intoleransi di sekolah-sekolah. Kemudian sebelumnya mereka melakukan juga riset tahun lalu itu mengenai mahasiswa, anak sekolah, dan guru-guru. Kesimpulannya sama. Kesimpulannya bahwa sekarang di Indonesia itu sikap intoleran secara implisit itu meningkat. Nah, memang ini juga sama dengan apa yang dilihat oleh BNPT, bahwa tapi kan BNPT tidak bisa satu-satunya bilang, oh ya riset ini benar, padahal ada ratusan riset yang lain. Ada juga dilakukan misalnya oleh Wahid Foundation. Dia juga menemukan hal yang sama, terjadi sikap intoleran di masyarakat Indonesia, meningkat radikalisme juga di masyarakat Indonesia. Tapi bukan berarti bahwa BNPT bilang bahwa ini kita tidak legitimize hasil penelitian ini. Tapi kalau kita lihat hasil penelitian ini kan untuk membuat pemerintah itu berpikir, karena ada suatu evidence base yang di dalam rangka membuat suatu kebijakan harus berdasarkan suatu riset yang ada. Dan menurut kami sebetulnya apa yang disebutkan oleh Ibu tadi itu sangat benar sekali bahwa I didn't get the question, tapi kalau tidak salah
langkah yang dilakukan oleh BNPT menyikapi survei ini.
Nah, langkah-langkah berikutnya yang tadi saya sebutkan bahwa kita sekarang sedang menyusun rencana aksi nasional. Rencana aksi nasional ini termasuk di dalamnya terkandung misalnya membuat kebijakan berdasarkan riset yang benar, evidence based. Kemudian kedua adalah kalau itu yang terkait dengan sekolah, bagaimana sekolah ini juga dapat memperkuat resiliensinya. Karena ternyata kalau kita lihat hasil survei kemarin, guru TK itu jauh lebih intoleran daripada guru-guru SD, SMA, SMP, SMA. Jadi kalau kita lihat, berarti kan paling parah adalah sikap anak-anak kita belajar itu belajar dari mana? Dari dulu TK kan pertama. So ditanamnya udah paling kecil sekali, sehingga ini harus disikapi. Nah memang one size fits all answer tidak ada, tapi ya kita harus lihat gitu bagaimana masing-masing kita.
Bang Usman, ya silakan. How do we deal with this?
What has been decreased, and this is a very good news, is actually religious intolerance. According to nationwide survey in 2010, 2011, 2016, 2017, and 18 by LSE and by Indicator have shown the slight decrease of religious intolerance. What religious intolerance means, if you are asked, how about other religion having a house of worship in your environment, they tend to disagree. But now it's getting better the way they responded. And secondly is the activities of other religion in your neighborhoods. But what is worrying is now political intolerance. This is about the question of whether you, as a Muslim, are going to choose, for example, a non-Muslim candidate as a mayor, as a governor, as president, as vice president. So this is something that we need to address. The answer is political education, public education, civic education.
Michael, you want to add something to this? No? Okay, we proceed to the next question. Silakan, Mas ya.
I have a question for BNPT. There is a fifth wave of terrorism, such as jihadis. If you talk about jihadis, we have to talk about Dr. Shaikh Abdullah Azam as a global jihadist theologist. So here the question: how the government or people who has an authority on this put this man on a counter-terrorism perspective? Thank you.
Silakan, namanya tadi disebutin lagi, yang siapa tadi yang di dalam pertanyaan kamu itu?
Dr. Shaikh Abdullah Azam.
Dan diharapkan orang ini masuk ke dalam apa tadi pertanyaannya?
Gimana BNPT menempatkan orang ini dalam perspektif counter-terrorism?
That's a very specific question. Do you know this guy by any chance?
He is a global jihadist theologist.
I don't think he's on Instagram. That's the thing. Yeah. Okay, silakan Mas Andhika. Maybe like setipe orang-orang yang setipe dengan apa ya atribusinya seperti itu, apakah ditempatkan dalam kategori tertentu dalam BNPT?
Kalau misalnya untuk program deradikalisasi yang dilakukan di Selatan untuk di tahanan di lapas, itu kita menggunakan juga misalnya beberapa orang untuk sama-sama memberikan pendekatan pencerahan kepada narapidana teroris agar mereka kembali ke jalan yang benar. Nah itu kita juga lakukan. Selain itu kita juga melakukan misalnya dengan ulama-ulama yang sudah memiliki nama agar mereka kembali ke jalan hidup yang lebih moderat misalnya. Jadi certainly pasti orang-orang itu akan kita pakai. Yang jelas adalah bahwa yang kita pakai bukan justru malah yang berseberangan dengan paham yang ada di BNPT. Sehingga itu ada di kita.
Oke, baik. Silakan, banyak.
Saya Aisyah, saya dari Koalisi Perempuan Indonesia. So recently we conducted a study on the minimum age of child marriage, and at first we assumed that child marriage is caused by lack of education, but the recent studies show that child marriage is caused by radicalization, and it is not only occurred in rural areas but also in DKI Jakarta. And so this brings me to my question. So how do we protect ourselves from radical agenda that has slowly merged into the values of, not values, adopted to the course of public policy in our nation?
The issue of political intolerance that was discussed earlier. I think it's very dangerous if we blame society. Society can be manipulated by politicians who lack imagination and then turn to the lowest common denominator, i.e. religious faith, to get themselves elected. So I think rather than see this as muncul dari masyarakat, I think it's coming from very, very poor politicians who lack imagination, and when they join political parties, they want to get elected, and they look at the area they might get elected in, and they say, well, most of the people here are Muslims, so if I say that I'm a good Muslim, and I demand that you're a good Muslim too, and that then becomes a path to political intolerance that you were talking about, Usman. I think it's very dangerous if we see this as just coming from society that is suddenly very conservative. It has to be driven by something else, and I think it's been driven by politicians from the top.
I think I agree with Michael. I just want to add one thing, which is law enforcement. So this is also related to the previous question on the global terrorist figure. I think the heavy way of enforcing the law, executing suspected of terrorism on the street, for example, will not be able to undermine the terrorist narratives, the radical narratives. It will fuel their narratives that it is a war. It will also create an imagination of revenge. It won't give you a deterrent effect. So I think the key point is a more comprehensive approach. Of course, the society, the law enforcement, the political community is all together needs a comprehensive approach. I think what we need to do is, for example, at the level of states, there has been a lot of best practices in different countries. What we need to do using diplomacy is to exchange best practices, also the favor, right? So intelligent cooperation, community cooperation, including schools, that's also important. So I think what happens now is not partially on the society or partially on the political community or partially on the law enforcement and security agency. It's like mixed all together. So we need a more comprehensive approach in addressing these very deep-rooted issues of radicalism or terrorism or violence activism.
Pak Tatang, mungkin boleh dijelaskan juga dari BNP 2 TKI, ada nggak nih TKI yang akhirnya kena paham radikalisme begitu, kemudian apa yang dilakukan oleh BNP 2 TKI?
Iya, kalau bicara radikalisme ini sesungguhnya kita agak telat ya kesadaran masyarakat. Silent majority terlalu diam dan terlalu mengabaikan. Faktanya bahwa bahkan sekarang tenaga kerja Indonesia di Hong Kong, di Taiwan, di Korea Selatan itu sudah terbukti dan bahkan sudah ada yang ditangkap. Dan sekarang kita mulai betul-betul secara serius melibatkan banyak pihak dari MUI, Majelis Ulama Indonesia dan juga dari tokoh-tokoh masyarakat. Dan kita mulai di BNP memiliki program pembinaan tenaga kerja Indonesia melalui komunitas. Jadi memang sudah saatnya sekarang yang silent majority ini harus bangkit untuk tidak membiarkan gitu. Karena faktanya di keluarga saya juga ada di grup keluarga atau teman itu terjadi. Ketika kita jelaskan, ada yang memang sudah die hard, tapi ada juga sebagian besar yang mereka menyadari akhirnya secara perlahan mereka akhirnya diam, yang tadi ikut aktif. Nah ini saya rasa generasi muda semuanya ini juga harus kita mencoba secara aktif. Jangan biarkan ketika ada radikalisme di lingkungan terdekat, maka kita harus berikan penjelasan. Dan sekarang memang pada tahapan apakah ini lagi tiarap, gitu kan? Tapi yang pasti kita harus sama-sama menghadapinya. Terima kasih.
Baik, terima kasih. And then I would like to have the final words then from the other four panelists. Karena kita berbicara di sini to the young generation. I would say the underlying issues would be right now the growing of intolerance, kemudian racism, whatever that cause human security issues, basically. So what needs to point out, I guess, what they need to know?
State level to show solidarity to countries that are hosting large numbers of refugees, and at an individual level, solidarity with people who have been forced to leave their countries, which is not a choice that they had. And then again on inclusion of refugees in showing that they are actually a resource, that they can contribute, they have skills and resources to offer to their host countries, including here in Indonesia.
I just wanted to reinforce the point I made earlier that in order to help in some of the ways in which this region is suffering from conflict, from threats to human security due to refugees, terrorism and so on. The important thing is for you to use civil society and social enterprise as a path to greater collaboration and cooperation with people of your own age, people of the same generation in other countries in the region. Don't wait for governments to help.
I think this is one thing. The UN spelled out several areas of priority that looks into how we can mitigate problems of violence, and one of them is empowering youth. And I believe when you say empowering youth, it means that youth is a solution itself. So again, message for the youth is be part of that joint efforts when it comes to doing something for your community. And that also includes how you can mitigate radicalism.
Well, simply we need to better communicate than the demonizers. The demonizers exploited, as Michael said, politics of hate, politics of suspicion, politics of fear, or demonization themselves. So I think we need to be better in communicating the issues than them. And we are facing them now. More and more leaders across the globe being elected with this rhetoric. So it's up to you, young generation, millennials generation, to act or to do something about it. Talking about intolerant radicalism is talking about illiberalism. You cannot fight illiberalism with illiberalism. For example, you promote freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, freedom of organization, but then you can't say to other organizations like HTI, you can't have organization. You have to promote the same values. It would be better for us to see them formally in the organization rather than to see those radicals on the underground, which we cannot see, which we cannot talk, which we cannot have a dialogue. And on the level of law enforcement, I think policy that is non-discriminatory, that is respecting human rights, should be the basic principle. Forgetting human rights is just going to worsen the politics of hate, the politics of fear, the politics of suspicion. Thank you.
Makasih. Jadi pesannya, be the agent of change, peace, solidarity, and tolerance. Terima kasih kepada Bapak-Bapak dan